So if anybody's new, please give me a wave or say hi, I'm new. Otherwise, I'm going to dive right in. I always talk supplies. Today I'm not quite as prepared. I didn't set out my brushes in advance, but I'm just going to use my regular brushes. I've got a number 10 and I've got a nice little detailed round brush. These are my Escotas, so I'll set them here. But this is the goal to work from today. I've done this a couple of times in my class, and my goal is to do it really loosely and just really suggesting this floral vase here. So I've got some demos that I did in previous classes, and it's great just to kind of do it in a really kind of semi-abstract way, just suggesting the little sunflowers there like sunshine. There's a little bit of splatter that I haven't cleaned up, but these are just little demos here. So you'll need, I'll post that reference photo for you as well, but you'll need a piece of paper. I've been doing the scrap piece of paper to do a little bit of a demo first, and you'll need a good piece of paper. You'll need paper towels, you'll need some painter's tape to tape down your work, water, of course, your brushes, and your paint. So I'm going to keep it simple today. I'm just going to use a very basic yellow. I'm still using up my tubes. I'm always cutting open different tubes that have been dried out a little bit. So this is a really common problem with the watercolor tubes, is if you leave a lid off, it dries up. So you can just take a scissors and kind of open it up, and there's still tons of paint in there. So this is a great example. I'm going to peel this right off, and then you see it's all still money in the bank. That's perfectly good tape. Sorry, good paint that I'm going to use today. All right, depending on the brand. The core brands and some of the M. Graham brands, they tend to last a little longer. They're a little gummier. Sometimes I find the Winsor Newtons, they tend to do this little pebble thing. And this is actually a Grumbacher one, but that's sometimes an issue as well with some of the different brands of paint. So it works better with some brands than others. But for today, we'll just be using a blue, a yellow for the sunflowers, and I've got a little bit of pinky red here, and I've got a little bit of green in my palette too. And then I've got some leftover stuff that's just in my palette from last time. So that's pretty much all you need. Any colors work. So I did see a comment up there. I'm just going to scroll back. Go over your colors again. Yeah, no problem. A couple of newish people. What picture examples would be helpful? All right. Perfect. So I will try to slow it down, and I just got basically my 3 colors. These are my primary colors. A yellow here, a blue, and a pinky red, and I've got a little bit of green. Really doesn't matter which colors. I'm not going to go into like whether it's cerulean or this and that for today. Because for something like this, as long as you have a nice yellow for the sunflowers, you're really good. So we're going to kind of go through and do a little bit of wet on wet. I start a lot of my paintings wet on wet just to kind of get, just to kind of dive in. It helps get some color on the paper. It helps unify the painting, and it helps you loosen up. I feel like it's really intimidating looking at a blank page. So what I usually do is a little bit of wet on wet technique, and I just start kind of covering my paper in a little bit of color. And then I go wet on dry and tighten everything up. So for anybody that's new, when we're painting, what we want to do is use our water here. You can't really see that. And make these puddles. And we're always picking up paint from these puddles. It's all about controlling the water. So here's an example of just like a nice kind of juicy puddle that we want to be working with. Now this painting has a lot of gray in the background. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Allergy season is starting. So I'm mixing in a little bit of all my 3 colors together, and I'm going to show you guys, this is how you kind of get a nice neutral. So I'm picking up, I'm actually just going to grab some of this. This is a Naples that's yellow that's on the thing, on my palette from last time. And when I start to mix these colors in, do you see how I'm getting a neutral? This is a little on the green side. I can keep adding some blue. I can add a little bit more red, and it's really normal if you I kind of call it Goldilocksing back and forth. It's like we're really trying to find a mixture of an equal part of all 3, but sometimes you add a little bit too much of one color, and then you end up with a mixture that's too kind of pink. So I'd want to go back to the other side thinking about green, so I'm adding some more yellow, and you can really kind of go back and forth and end up making a neutral. So mixing all 3 of your primaries together will start to give you a neutral. So for our background, we're really going to want kind of a neutrally color. So that's like a really quick demo on how to make a neutral. But let me go back to my wet and wet. So with wet and wet technique, I wet my paper, and you want it to be pretty wet. You don't want there to be a lot of water on the top. Now, your quality of paper really affects this process. So if you're doing wet and wet and you're really struggling with it, check your paper. So this is an inexpensive paper. This is my Canson paper. And you see how the water isn't absorbing as evenly into it. It is kind of sitting on the top. So if you're struggling with kind of these lakes on top of it, sometimes giving it a minute to soak into the paper helps. Sometimes you can kind of add a little bit of extra water, drain some of it off if that helps. So if you're really struggling with getting a lake on top of the paper, those are some kind of tips. I know someone messaged me about that earlier. But wet and wet, I'm just taking that nice gray mixture that I've made, and I'm just starting to kind of put it down. And you see it's going to blend. It's going to just kind of start to move across the paper. And when I want some yellow in here, I can literally start putting some of my color down and just kind of suggesting the form. So I'm doing this in such a loose way that I totally know this might stress people out because it is a very loose, very abstract way. I'm not able to get any details here. So I'm grabbing some green, I'm throwing some green in here, and that's really it for color. I know that the bottom half of this is going to be more of a brown color, so I'll throw some brown on, and I'm basically creating an almost abstract image of what I'm trying to paint. And that's just going to kind of give us almost like a little bit of a haziness, a little bit of a background, just a loose, kind of crazy background. And like this is an example of one of the loose examples that I did here, where you can see all the colors blending into each other. So this is a little bit more of a complicated lesson. We are really going to struggle to control the water, but I think if we do it slow enough, I know we can do it all right, and we'll just have fun with it. But from there, I'm going to dry my whole background, and then I'll start going in with some detail. So wet on dry is the next technique, and it'll be just kind of painting our shapes. And with a series of glazes. So glazes are adding a lot of layers, and we'll be glazing them on top. So we'll start with a really wet and wet, kind of loose. You'll really want to try to focus on mixing your neutral colors for your background, and that's pretty much all we'll need today. So let's dive in. I'm going to start by, you know what, I'm going to grab some water really quick because I forgot to. All right, just from the bathroom there. All right, so we've got 22 people. That's amazing. I'm going to work small. This is also my other trick too, is it helps us to finish a pretty big painting in a pretty small time. And I think this is something that I've learned more from doing these classes than I have when I've taught regular classes, because I tend to work big, about this size. It's about like 8 by 10 myself. So then I tell my students to work that size, and it's really hard for them sometimes because it's a lot to cover. It's a lot to control, and you're making it a lot more work. You can always go bigger later. So something that I've kind of learned from doing all these classes is it's good when you're practicing and learning to work a little bit on the small side. So lots of news too, just while I'm setting up here. I'm getting a pencil. You'll need a pencil for today. I feel really scattered today. Sorry, guys. But I'm going to be teaching a beginner's watercolor class online through Homer Watson Gallery. That's going to start on Tuesdays in May. So if you check out the Homer Watson Gallery's page, there'll be information on that. It'll be on Zoom, so there'll be a lot more interaction. You'll be able to answer questions. I'll be able to see what you guys are doing in real time, which is going to be great. And also it's going to be a little bit more techniques based. So if you really liked when I do those quick demos on wet and wet, and when I do flat wash and gradient wash, and when I'm really talking about color theory, we'll really be looking at color theory and hitting the basics in a lot more detailed sort of way. So it's going to be a totally different structure from these paint nights, but that starts in May. So if you are learning watercolors from the very beginning and you're interested, I think it's by donation too, so it's a very affordable class, and I'm really looking forward to teaching that. And then on Mondays, I'm doing an Art Explorers class for Williamsburg Community Center, and again, that's going to be online through Google Classrooms. There's going to be two of them. There's going to be one for kids, and we're going to kind of use supplies that we have around the house, crayons and things like that for the kids class, and just kind of explore art. And then for the adults, we'll be touching on a little bit of watercolor, and just it's going to be both called Art Explorers, and looking at kind of drawing and creating art as well. And that's going to be Monday nights through Williamsburg Community Center. So I'm really excited to be teaching again, and to be teaching in a kind of a more formal setting. So, and then I'm hoping to do a little bit more of that as time goes on. So I'll definitely be posting, so keep an eye out for that. That's the good news. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit after we get the drawing done about what else is going on. To do these sunflowers, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to draw all the petals. I'm just going to place them by drawing the circles, the centers. What do you call that? I'm not even sure what you call that. But I'm just going to draw them in here. And it's a very simplified way to do it. And then when I draw my jar, I'm really going to simplify it even further. So I'm just drawing my jar here. And it's okay. This is the nice thing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Because when it is loosening up, we don't have to take as much time perfecting our drawing. So I'm going to draw my table behind it. So I've got the nice vase here, and again, we're just kind of suggesting that there's going to be some leaves here. There's going to be some yellow here. There's going to be these kind of threads on the jar. And then just a circle here is going to be that water level. Now it's important for composition to kind of try to put that water level either above or below this horizon line, because that's going to help just with basic composition. Then I've got my stems. They kind of crisscross in here. And that's pretty much it. So the jar, you really want to see, I'll even put another round thing. So we're really drawing two round shapes to suggest that this jar is 3D. Do you see how I kind of did that there? I'm going to move it a little bit. And I like that my jar is a little kind of wonky. That really, I find, helps, I think, loosen up. When you're not obsessing over the jar shape, you can sometimes, go a little crazier and be a little freer. So sometimes slowing yourself down and making a perfect drawing isn't always the best way to go. So that's my very simple drawing. I'll give you guys a second to catch up. I love kneaded erasers. So if you have one at home, I'd highly suggest, taking a look at them. And you can just kind of mold it into shapes and pick up some of that extra graphite. Less is more. It is hard to pick up the graphite through the paper after paint's on it. So when you think about your paint, it's really like a very thin layer. It's almost like, thin like on a molecular level. It's very thin layer of pigments. So, but unfortunately, sometimes it means that the graphite can't be picked up afterwards. So depending on the paint, depending on the paper, sometimes I can go in and erase through my artwork, but a lot of the times your lines are still going to be somewhat noticeable. So keep that in mind too. So fewer lines is better. All right, and the other thing that I always tell people when we draw a jar is make sure to curve these bottoms here, because that really helps to make them look 3D. A lot of people end up doing kind of what I did in this demo, getting a very flat bottom, and that really kind of flattens it out and makes it a little bit just less 3D, if that makes sense. All right, so I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna do wet and wet just like I talked about. So I'm gonna move to a bigger brush, and what I always forget to do, and I know you guys are probably used to this, is I always tell students that we wanna mix our colors first, and then just like you guys, I get so excited to start painting that I wet my paper and then I'm like, oh, I have to mix my colors. So I do wanna start with a neutral. So I'm mixing all three of my colors kind of in the center of the palette here. So I've got a little bit of that blue, I've got a little bit of that pink, and I'm grabbing some of this Naples yellow. It's a nice creamy color, and I'm putting it in here. And already I've got a nice kind of neutrally blue color. Now I want the top to be a little bit more on the blue side. I want the bottom, because it's a table, to look a little bit more on the yellow side. So I'm going to kind of mix two separate puddles. So my bottom, the yellow part, is going to look a little bit more, well, just that yellow. So I'm adding a little bit more yellow into my neutral. So I've kind of got those two colors ready to go, and I want some of that pure yellow from my sunflowers ready to go. So that's pretty much just right here and ready to go. So mixing all my colors in advance. And you'll notice that I mix that neutral really quickly. That comes with a lot of experience. That's one of the best things after a couple of years. You really start to increase your color mixing skills, and being a fast, kind of efficient color mixer takes a long time too. So it's very normal for students to kind of struggle getting that gray, getting that neutral like just right, you know. So I see a lot of students kind of going back and forth where it's too green, it's too red, it's too green, it's too red, and you kind of like ping pong back and forth. That's really normal, especially with things like greens, everything like that. Color mixing is an art, I guess, and it takes time. So be kind to yourself, be gentle, and don't stress out if you're not getting the perfect colors. All right, so I'm wetting the whole paper. Top and bottom. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by throwing in some of those colors. So I'm going to start at the bottom here. And everything's going to reflect, especially with glass. So there's my table color, really basically. I'm going to make sure my color's got a little bit kind of mixed here. I want a nice bluey color in the background. I'm going to kind of throw it. I'm going to kind of go around where those plants would be, those sunflowers. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap. I don't care if this blends at this point. I would say go with a bit of a lighter hand. And just remember that everything is going to be all right. It's just paper. Let's grab some of that yellow. And then all I'm going to do is just kind of put a quick yellow where all my yellows are. And I don't want to mix it too much because I don't want these to be green. So I'm really just kind of going in with some color, maybe some reflections at the bottom here. And again, if you screw up, doesn't matter. Like I could really splatter it right now. And we're just kind of toning the paper and getting it started. Really important here, you can grab your paper towel and you can start kind of picking up a little bit of color. So there's a little bit of a white here. There's some white here, and you don't have to necessarily cover the entire page. It's good if there's some whites kind of peeking through. But let's not obsess over it. If you get puddles of water, and this is a big thing for a lot of us, you can use the thirsty brush technique, which you guys have all heard me say a million times. So I'm drying off the brush, and then I'm just going into some of these areas with a lot of excess water, and I'm just picking it up. So I'm not coloring, I'm not mucking around, I'm just taking the tip of my brush, dipping it in here, and just picking up that extra water. It's going to help it dry evenly. So even though it looks like not much is happening, as it dries kind of organically and kind of naturally, the colors are still blending on a really subtle level. So I do find that you get much more beautiful blends when you let it dry naturally. I'm going to use the hairdryer to kind of give it a blast, but it almost kind of halts this process a little bit. And I don't know how to describe it, but I get nicer blends. It just dries nicer when you let it dry naturally. So if you can, if you have the time, if you're watching this back later, do that. There's a puddle. Sometimes you might find that you don't have a puddle, and then as the paper warps a little bit, you might start to get little puddles, and that's okay. Sometimes you think you got them all, and there's still puddles. So I gotta blast it with a hairdryer. Hey guys, I don't know if you guys see the comments, but Janet just messaged me. She said, okay, love this. You've inspired me for my container making project. So Janet teaches STEM art at Williamsburg. So she's an art teacher as well. And she teaches with me at Williamsburg Community Center. So check out her page if you can see her, Janet Creative Counseling. And she does art therapy and teaches amazing classes for kids. And check her out for sure. it still maybe has a little bit of a way to dry, and I can tell it's still very cool to the touch, so it's still a little damp. But sometimes you can kind of start working at one area and work around, so that's sometimes good to know. And sometimes if things blend a little bit, like this is a very loose style, we're not really obsessing over copying the picture. And to be honest, I have these out kind of to the side here, but I'm not really looking at my reference photo at this point. So I'm not really copying it. I'm just kind of drawing like the idea of sunflowers in a jar. I did a nicer painting where I really slowed down and I copied this image, and it's already sold. But I did like that picture. But this is a beautiful little birthday card. It's something kind of really loose and abstract. So I want to get my centers in here. So I'm going to mix a little bit of this brown. And this is a burnt umber or a raw umber if you have it. A burnt sienna works well. Or again, you can kind of mix all your colors together and make a dark. The center doesn't really matter, and I usually add a little bit of an extra color because I don't like to go to a dead brown. I want to mix in every corner of my painting. I really want a little bit of all my colors. So if I think about my triad, I don't like to color yellow flowers, brown bottom. Like I don't want to color in like a coloring book, if that makes sense. I really want to mix every color so that it looks special and it looks unified. And it looks like it's kind of bespoke to the whole painting. So I've got my kind of brown color here, and I'm going to start with kind of putting in my centers. I'm just going to kind of draw them in. But it's kind of amazing how, you know, it already starts to kind of pop out. So even with these soft, kind of lost and found edges, we're really seeing quite a lot. Now, if you have a little bit more experience, this is kind of a great time to blend and to play with your color blending. So maybe I'm charging in some other colors. And I'd love it if you guys gave yourself permission to play. So what I took is a bit of pink there, a little bit of pink and orange, and I just charged it in. So charging is where I take that wet mixture there and I just added some extra color. It's going to blend on the page and become really natural. So if I went in and tried to draw my petals here, I'm going to lose that nice center. So I'm going to leave that for a second and I'm going to try to come around. So I'm going to mix a nice green here, grabbing some of my yellow. And you'll notice that my palette's getting a little bit muddy, but I don't hate that. Usually I have a lot of really clear colors and I mix a lot more carefully, but for something like this it doesn't really matter as much. So I'm grabbing my green and I'm putting like a leaf here, and I'm going to kind of suggest in between some areas here. I'm going to just using my brush kind of like in a dagger kind of motion. I'm really kind of swiping it over. I'm not obsessing over those shapes, just kind of really playing. So I kind of alluded to the fact that there was bad news. So the bad news, the good news is I'm doing some teaching gigs through a couple of different places. Bad news is I'm going to stop the nightly paints. I have loved these. They have meant the world to me and I've loved connecting with you guys. But I have to be completely honest, is I'm kind of burning out a little bit. Every night is a lot, and I find that I have so much less in the tank these days. And I think everybody maybe feels the same way, but these classes have been great and they've been such a great way for me to get up and get moving, but it's also the only thing that I find myself kind of doing. So I'd like to kind of spread out my energy a little bit more, do a little bit more painting, and then in May I'm going to be doing these other classes. So I'm going to be doing the odd paint night. I'm going to try for once a week to do a paint with me. I'm still going to do the odd takeovers with different local groups to try to meet new people and just kind of keep up with it. But the nightly 6 o'clock paint nights, this is going to be the last one until I figure out kind of where I'm going from here. So, and I hate even announcing that. I feel like I might be letting you guys down, but I think it's just kind of the right thing to do for now. But I do want to let all you guys have all the videos that I've done before. So I would say about 70% of them I have saved to my phone. The odd one doesn't seem to save for some reason. I go to hit save and it doesn't work. So there's a handful of them that are lost forever. But I still have like a dozen or so of these streams. So what I'm going to do is I want to put them and make them available to people to watch again. So what I'm going to be doing, and you'll have to watch, but I'm going to be launching a Patreon page where you guys can sign in and you can have access to all the videos that I've done in the past. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Patreon, but it's a lot of artists are using it, a lot of musicians. A good friend of mine, Richard Garvey, is a musician and he's using it. And it's basically a way, it's like a subscription service. So people can subscribe to your Patreon page and then they can have access to like exclusive content. So it's going to be really inexpensive. I'm going to do like $1 a month subscription or something really low, just but it helps put them out there. So that you guys can watch the videos at any time, and then there's different features and stuff that I can offer you guys through there. But I think that that's organically the way that I have to kind of move my efforts towards. So that's a lot of information, and I'm going to get back to the painting now, but basically that's kind of what I'm working on, and I'll keep you guys posted for sure. So let's see this jar already. My trick is going to be to not overwork this jar. So I've got some of that blue, and I'm just going to mix some of these where the water's at the top. I'm going to put another line here, and I'm going to soften these edges. So softening is when I take my brush like this. I've wet it with just clean water, and I've dried it a little bit, so it's just a little wet. And I'm going to kind of pull it around so that I don't have a hard line. So just a really loose pulling that color over. So I've put my color pure here, and I'm going to just kind of scrub along that bottom and pull that color over. So this is such a great project. So I don't have a reference photo, I'm not copying anything. I can paint kind of intuitively. I can look at the painting and see what it needs. I'm not trying to make it look like anything. I just want to make it look nice. So I'm taking my brush, I'm using a finer tip. You might want to move to a finer tip at this point, but I'm just going to kind of suggest some of these threads in the mason jar. But it's essentially a see-through kind of jar, so I don't have to worry too much. It's already kind of reflecting everything. But I just have to suggest kind of that it's a jar. I've got some extra brown here, and maybe I want this to look a little bit more defined. I'm going to use that same softening technique. I'm going to kind of push along the table here. Kind of go up to my edge there, and wet my brush so it's just damp. I'm going to scrub along that edge and soften that edge. So, and I'm not coloring in the whole thing. I'm not treating this like a coloring book. That's really important. I'm not coloring in my whole background. I'm really just adding color. Sounds like one of those hippie things to say. So I'm just going to put a little shadow under here. So just like the I don't know what we call this. I don't think it has a specific term, but I guess we'll just put a kind of deposit and drag. Deposit the color and drag. We can think of a much cooler name for that, I'm sure. But I just put that color down in its pure form, kind of, you know, like a nice mixture, and then I just I dragged it down. I softened that edge. Let me go up here to this table. Now, if your background isn't super clear or super dark, you can go back in and you can try to negative paint, and I'm going to show you what that is. You can negative paint kind of around, but here I am softening this edge here. Now it's starting to really pop. So if your background is looking a little wimpy, you can go in and kind of negative paint around your flowers. So to see how I'm painting kind of around here, and again, I'm going to do that softening technique again. But that's going to start to develop these flowers. So all I really want to do here is start to show off those flowers. So I'm going to mix a bit of an orangier color. A little bit more of my yellow. But to keep it loose and to keep it kind of abstract, the best thing you can do is less. This is really like less is more, for real. So I'm grabbing some pure yellow out of my tube here. And I'm just kind of suggesting these shapes. And you see how I know that this is still wet, but I don't really care at this point. I just really want to get the color down. So I'm just suggesting a little bit more and just really kind of using my brush to flick out these shapes, to blend them out. Adding a little bit here and a little bit there, not thinking too much. And I just want a little bit more green, so I'm mixing in a little bit of my blue with my yellow, getting some nice greens, and I'm kind of going in between some of these shapes, because right now it looks like there's floating. There still is some, oh, I kind of made a mistake there, so I'm turning that into a leaf here too. It's now a happy little leaf. Just a few more. And really, that's just about it. Like, that's a very quick painting. And you'll notice it's not very defined. Of course, like, I could go take a look at my reference photo and I could be going back and forth, like there's a line there, there's a line there, and I could copy it. But I don't want to do that for this one. I just really want it to be a playful kind of example. Now I want to show you one way that you can kind of sometimes fix a painting. I kind of call it like my Hail Mary to fix a painting. If you're finding that your painting's not looking very defined, you're not loving it, I'm going to show you one more trick that you can do. And first I'm going to dry this completely. And I was just reading some of your comments. Thanks so much, guys. To be honest, I never really thought it would last this long. I was very optimistic kind of at first, and I kind of thought, oh great, well I'll just do a couple of live paint nights and it'll be fun. And of course, like, I am the type of personality that like does something and then just kind of goes all in. I'm like, yeah, I can do a paint night every single night at 6. And then it was like, I don't know, last week I'm kind of like, it's been a month. I'm kind of tired. You know, not to say that I'm not enjoying it or anything like that, but I was just kind of like, I'm burning out a little bit. So it means the world to me that you guys are so supportive and so kind, and I've had a lot of fun doing this. And I will still do the odd one, but I want to explore doing time lapses. I want to try to explore just a bunch of different things. So if you're not loving a painting, if you're finding that it's very flat or not very kind of exciting, or you made mistakes, sometimes you can just do a little bit of an ink and wash technique. And I kind of call that my Hail Mary. So this is my like last ditch effort to sometimes save a painting, because we all make paintings where it's like, well, that didn't turn out how I wanted to. And a big problem with me and a big problem with beginners is sometimes our paintings get flat, they lack dimension. So one thing that I really like about my painting is how much definition there is here, how many different kind of colors there are. But this is all really loose and suggestive. So if you're not loving your painting, if you're not getting some of the detail, you know, especially for some of us don't have that brush finesse either, so doing fancy brush work and fancy detail work is maybe a little bit above their skill level. You can fall back on a little bit of drawing. So I'm just using kind of a sketchy technique and just a black pen to just kind of color in some of my lines. So it is kind of creating that kind of coloring book kind of effect. The trick is to not make it look like you're outlining the whole thing. Just suggest. The word of the day, suggest. Just suggest some of these colors. Suggest some of these outlines, some lost and found. So like with this background here, I'm not going to go in and draw the whole thing. I'm even going to do a broken line. It's just a little bit of a suggestion. Very much less is more. And you can be kind of expressive about this. I'm probably overdoing it. I've got too many lines there. There we go. But again, even to just do some dots. So if your texture isn't that great, you could do a little bit of a dotted effect. That's sometimes all right. There's a lot of different ways you can play. And I would really probably advise against really outlining the sunflowers, or you're going to get something that looks very cartoony. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Ink and wash can be a beautiful technique. Really depends on what you're going for, but this is a very different technique. Now, I'm using a Tombow here. So this is a regular kind of pen. It's kind of meant for calligraphy. And I'm going to show you kind of what you can play with. It's all about play today, I think. I don't mind that. But it's not a waterproof pen. So then maybe I wanted to go and blend that line out a little bit. Maybe I want some bleed. It just gives it a fun effect. I wouldn't go over the whole thing, but have fun with it, explore. So it will bleed when you add a little bit of extra water, but like, I don't hate that. I kind of like that look actually. And then when you kind of peel away, you could even go so far as to add detail here or there, anywhere. But that's kind of one of my techniques. So I know I've said this before in class, like one of my favorite, I think it was Angela Fair who said this, like if you've wrecked a painting, keep going until you learn something. And that, I loved when she said that. I thought that was just so perfect, because sometimes we all make paintings that don't turn out. So make them learning opportunities. You probably learned something already, but try one of those kind of what I call my Hail Mary techniques, like throw in the pen and see if you can save it. If you don't, you don't, and it's still going to be just a piece of paper that you put in the bin, and it's not a big deal. But every once in a while you try one of those techniques and you're like, hey, I don't mind that looks kind of cool, and then you have learned something. So, and at the very least you're practicing your technique more and more and more. So that's it for tonight's kind of really simple and loose sunflowers in a jar. So lots of things that are coming your way. Again, if you're interested in doing some of my classes through Homer Watson or Williamsburg, let me know. I'd still love to see your paintings from tonight, and I'm still going to keep sharing, and I'm probably going to be doing more paint nights anyway. It's just here and there. But yeah, for the first time, I'm not going to say see you guys tomorrow at 6, and I'm almost a little sad about that. But yeah, I think I'm really excited for all the things that I'm going to kind of launch in the next couple weeks, and kind of getting used to the new normal. So anyways, thank you everybody for joining me the last couple weeks, and I hope we all keep in touch, and I can't wait to see your paintings from tonight. All right, stay safe, everybody.